The thing that gets you through the door when you're talking to a senior politician is the data. The thing that gets things done is the anecdote. And I think the anecdote is the thing that comes from really having your finger on the pulse of the membership.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. Guest today is Ben Fletcher, Chief Executive Logistics UK, one of the UK's largest business groups representing the buyers and suppliers from logistics sector across road, rail, sea, and air. Ben brings more than 2 decades of experience across government, policy, and industry. Prior to joining Logistics UK, he served as the Chief Operating Officer at Make UK, where he led core areas including public affairs, membership, and commercial operations. His earlier career includes senior roles in government, working on strategic policy for cabinet ministers, and contributing to major national programs such as the London 2012 Olympics. In his current role, Ben is focused on strengthening the voice of the logistics sector and supporting its role in the UK economy at a time of significant change. Ben, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
No, it's great to have you here. So logistics sometimes gets described as the backbone of the economy. But what does that actually mean? You know, where do we see logistics? If it was going on, how would I know it? And who and what does it refer to?
I think our strapline here is that nothing moves without logistics. And I think that's a great phrase and a great way of looking at it. Logistics encompasses everything really about the movement of any kind of physical good anywhere, both domestically and internationally. So in terms of the places you're most likely to experience it these days, we increasingly buy our groceries from local supermarkets rather than big out-of-town shopping malls. And in order to actually maintain the level of goods in those supermarkets, they often have to be refreshed 2 or 3 times a day. So what you will see when you go and buy your dinner for tonight is often a vehicle parked outside with metal containers on it that's bringing all of that stuff into that shop so that they can have fully stocked shelves pretty much 24/7. And that's where I think you will see it. Where it's often hidden and the really kind of critical issues that matter are making sure that we have the medicine in our hospitals and in our pharmacies, that in particular things like the dinners that your kids might eat at school have been delivered safely and securely and on time. And that's where I think logistics really impacts on the day-to-day life, because that phrase, nothing moves without logistics. When you look at pretty much everything, if you're going to run out and get a sandwich for your lunch, the component parts or the sandwich itself would have been delivered by our industry. But often when you take 2 steps back, as well as the immediate element of the vehicle parked outside the shop, we are also servicing the construction industry, because nothing will get built without logistics. We're also delivering beer and wine and soft drinks to every pub and every bar and every hospitality location around the country. And we've got global supply chains, and that's very, very visible at the moment. Unfortunately, the rise in fuel costs, that's driven by the fact that there is a global shortage that's leading to a price hike, because fuel is very market sensitive, and the global logistics industry is moving product around the world and is currently having to adjust to the fact that because a lot of the shipping routes are affected, it's moving things onto air freight. You will see incredible complexities, which our brilliant ports will sort of resolve over the next few weeks. So really every aspect of our lives, whether it's the stuff we eat, the stuff we wear, the stuff we consume, the medicines that keep us healthy, the houses that we live in, and the offices that we work in, the logistics industry has made those happen and keeps them going.
So just to make sure I've kind of got that in my own head in the right way, I'm sure this is vastly too simple, but kind of what I get is it's what I might call shipping, whether it's trucks or rail or airplanes or whatever, moving things from point A to point B. And somewhere in there, it sounds like there's waiting until they're needed somewhere else. So let's call that warehousing. And then there must be a whole bunch of communication and information processing to tie it all together. I mean, have I missed out much?
The only thing that I would really add to that is the ports industry, both in terms of airports and maritime ports.
Okay. So where all the shipping stuff, whether it's air or rail or whatever, it all kind of comes together.
And I think the coming together point is absolutely vital. You've really hit the nail on the head there, because what you will find now increasingly is that what ports are themselves, rather than simply a place that you unload the good, you will also find that ports are the place that the maritime, the road and the rail might come together. When it's an airport, increasingly logistics hubs are being built around some of the specialist airports that take a lot of international freight. And sometimes actually there is a huge hub that doesn't depend on the port. It just is a great place to be based, to bring all of those capabilities together. Ports are both entry and exit, because we talk about goods coming in, but also British firms export a lot. So those are vital. But they're also really good places where all of the different modes can come together, and where people are increasingly building warehouse capacity, because your storage point is really key. In order to deliver logistics operations where the good arrives when it's needed, that might not necessarily be the day that it comes off a plane or a boat. So that you put it and disaggregate it and put it together with a different load, that's really key. So you've got the four big modes of road, rail, air and sea. And then you've got the really important critical places that the industry feeds off and responds to, which are ports and warehousing.
I love that image that it brings to my mind anyway of sort of the connecting points. You spent much of your career both in government and, kind of in and around big policy issues. What drew you to step into this role, leading an industry body?
I think it's going to be at the heart of some of the really big policy issues over the next few years. I've been in trade associations for the better part of a decade. The last big job I did was with Make UK, which is, you mentioned it in your introduction, it is the equivalent umbrella trade association for manufacturing. And that was a fascinating job, allowed me to move into a world where I could have an impact on policy making, an impact on government, but in a different role to some of the jobs that I'd done before. And what the manufacturing industry, which is a great success story for the UK, lots of people think that we don't make things anymore. In fact, the UK is one of the world's biggest manufacturing nations, and in things like aviation and automotive is a world leader in its own right. What became very clear to me in that role was that you can have the best factory in the world. You can have the best trained staff. You can have the best investments in digital technology and robots. You can have the most popular product. But if you haven't got a good relationship with the logistics industry, you can't get your components in, you can't get your raw materials in, and you can't get your product to market. And what that really brought out to me was that logistics is at the heart of economic growth in the UK. And the economy would grind to a halt within seconds if the logistics industry didn't exist. And we saw the fringes of that during COVID, where supply chain, because China shut down, you started to see the implications of that. So for me, this is a brilliant place to come, because I think some of those debates over the next few years about how does the country get more economic growth? How does it build millions of new homes? How does it launch lots and lots of new business? How does a country that's realigning from trade with the EU, its closest partners, to signing trade deals with countries further afield and seeking to maximize the benefits of those? And how does it realign its position in the global supply chain, given that countries like China are doing things differently and our manufacturing industry is reacting to that and changing alongside that? All of those big things will be driven by and supported by and will stand or fail on the success and the strength of the logistics industry. And I think part of the excitement for me is that we have got the opportunity to get that industry higher up the list of political priorities, because I'm not yet sure that government appreciates quite how dependent it is on our industry. And what I think we can do over the next few years is to make sure that we're cementing our place at the top of the economic debate, not just about, much as they're important, some very specific technical issues about the industry, but about showing how there is an umbilical link between a strong economy and a strong logistics sector.
One of the things I'd like to get a sense of is sort of the, size and shape of Logistics UK. Both, what's the membership look like? But then also any trade body has a group of people who work for the trade body. What's that group look like?
They're full of beautiful, talented, intellectually dynamic people, and I'm very, very proud to lead them. They're a great team, and it's a great industry. The industry and the organisation are not unsurprisingly quite consistent. The industry itself is bigger than people realise. Across the piece, it employs about 2.7, 2.8 million people and contributes about 8 or 9% of the total size of the UK economy. We have in total about 22,000 members. And predominantly our members, not exclusively, are an interesting mix of SME companies In particular, we have a very strong membership across some of the very big firms that are the global brands in logistics. And many of those firms themselves will have road haulage fleets, will own aeroplanes and do international freight by air, will either own or have significant interest in rail freight, and will also either own their own seagoing vessels or be very, very substantial international users of maritime freight. And they will also, unsurprisingly, own both ports and warehouses or have significant interests in those industries. Lots of other members of our organization whose primary business might, for example, be retail, but because they're such big retailers, the scale of the fleets that they own and the interests that they have across those modes and across warehousing and ports is similarly wide. So although we've got a strong SME membership, and in terms of our total numbers, the vast majority of our members are SMEs, we also are representing some of those global brands and those global retailers and very big domestic retailers who are very, very significantly dependent on and own large fleets. We also have an interesting core of membership from the kind of companies that are absolutely independent on and upon who the industry is equally dependent. So, for example, some of the very big property developers that are building warehouses and building big logistics hubs, they will be members of us because the policy things that we're focused on are the ones that matter to them, and their customers are our members. Have a symbiotic relationship with people like the really big industrial property development businesses because their growth and their industry is very much our membership. So those are some of the areas where we also have a substantial membership. In terms of staff, we employ not far off 350 people, and that's a mixture of the services that we offer and the political activity work that underpins it. In terms of the services we offer, we've been around for 130 years, and we are particularly well known for two really big things that are about trust and about quality. We run a vehicle inspection service, and we employ over 60 engineers who basically go around the country and make sure that the companies that use us, we assure that their vehicles are being maintained in a safe way. So we don't maintain vehicles. What we do is out and provide that first line of assurance to make sure that a company can be confident that they've had an independent verification that their vehicles are safe. And in a very regulated industry, making sure that vehicles are safe is something as a trade body really matters to us and the reputation of the industry and matters to our members. And we can go in and do an independent assessment to make sure that their vehicles are being checked and are up to the standard that we would all expect, particularly road vehicles too. We also run effectively a technology-based business because, again, in a regulated industry, we have to make sure that things like the digital equipment in a vehicle that records the driver's hours, the requirements that companies are insured and are up to date with all of the relevant regulations. We have a compliant software business that makes sure that if you're a transport manager, particularly in a road haulage business, you can be confident that you're running a fleet that's legitimate, legal and safe. And part of that is that digital element as well as the physical vehicle inspection. We run a lot of other services, lots of training, lots of compliance work, lots of technical regulation across all of the different modes of logistics. But those are the really big core things that we do from services. And we have a really big and strong membership team because our members are at the heart of what we do, and making sure that we have our finger on the pulse is really key. So we have lots of staff who are talking to our members all day, every day. We run regional councils across the country. We run very specific councils for the different types of logistics industry to make sure that the road issues and the rail issues, etc., are captured. And we have a really strong policy team because one of the things that people expect us to do, and which we've developed a reputation for over just the last 100 years, is we can bring the temperature and the pressure and the issues that members are facing and bring that to bear in the development of policy. And one of the things that government really wants from the industry is a clear voice, because if they are going to develop policy that supports the industry, that understands some of the challenges the industry are facing, us having that powerful voice on behalf of the sector and it being really informed by members as well as what some policy experts are thinking as they sit at their desk. That's our sweet spot. And that's why the strength of the scale of membership and our representation across all of those different modes of logistics, that is our unique selling point. And it's the reason why government is so keen to listen to us. And we've got an absolutely brilliant, and I think I said earlier, beautiful team who work on that so that they do it really, really well. Everyone here is beautiful and genius-like levels of intellect, and it's a great pleasure to lead them.
Ben, just to kind of recap what I think I've heard there, there's a bit that you do that's about interacting with your memberships. And I'm sure some of that is getting them to pay their subs and all that, but it sounds like the much more useful thing for everybody is really understanding what's happening with them and where particularly government policy either might be headed in the wrong direction or might be inadequate or whatever, and then engaging with government to help them understand that. So I've kind of got that. And then it sounds like there's a big chunk of what you do that you have to tell me if I'm wrong, but that any of your members could decide they want to come to you for the vehicle inspections or whatever, the training, or they could go to a commercial provider of those. Is when you're in that situation, to what extent do you feel, you have to compete the same way a business competes? And to what extent is it's all sort of part of a package?
It's a very competitive environment. And the reality is that particularly for our members in the road haulage space, it's an industry that works at really tight margins. So the idea that we could just operate and charge whatever we wanted and that people would still use us is just not a commercial reality that we exist in. It's a competitive market and a tight market. I think where some of those things come together, though, is about the element to which we're trusted. We have to have our finger on the pulse of the membership for all of those policy and lobbying and political activity reasons that you alluded to. But we also have to have our finger on the pulse of the membership to make sure that the services that we're offering, the quality that we're offering, and the value that we're bringing to them is value for money and efficient and effective. So yes, it is a competitive market. Some of the things we do, I think we do that are unique, but altruism doesn't get you very far in business. We have to be very, very good at what we do. We have to operate at an incredibly high level of quality. And yes, we may have a small benefit sometimes in that people will trust us because they've known us. They've known we're here for a long time, but we always have to back that up by coming to the market with a really strong offer. And in both of those areas that we talked about, the really big services that we offer, but also in some of our training and so on, there are many, many competitors either for some of that work or all of that work. And we really have to stay on our toes to make sure that we're really top of the class in terms of what we deliver. And some of that's also because a trade association for an industry, people expect you to be good. They might look over some inadequacies in a small local firm that's just started up doing some of that stuff. We can understand if that organization isn't quite as good as you, but we expect you to be as good as you every single time, every single day. And one of the really pleasurable things in the time I've been here is that, our vehicle inspection service is doing tens of thousands of bits of work every single year. And our complaint level is a fraction of 1%. So we are delivering, really an outstanding service because people who work for us feel passionate about the industry. And the companies that they look after are expecting and very pleased to receive a quality service. And that's an incredibly rewarding thing as chief executive to be able to say.
No, I can imagine. So there's kind of two things I'd like to explore a little bit. And I have a sense they might be related, but maybe not. One is, it was sort of what's the strategy for Logistics UK and how did all that come about? But the other one sort of goes back to something we were talking about before. Maybe mostly it comes to my mind around ports, but I sort of want to see if it applies more broadly. And that's the whole issue of, I don't even know if the best term for it is dual use, but certainly the issue of national security, military use is coming to the fore for all sorts of reasons. Just, do those two fit together? Are they two different things? What's the strategy and what do you think about the whole kind of dual use issues?
I mean, look, there's definitely a link, and I might try and get to your question in the sequence that you asked it. But the strategy, I think, is about accelerating something that the organization has done quite successfully, and I've been a beneficiary of in the time that I've been here, which is that we have changed our name, we have modernized the organization, and the ambition has been to really become that single voice for the whole industry. There are lots of other brilliant trade associations that represent particular parts of the industry, and I think our job is to be the organization that brings some of that together and pushes some of the big cross-cutting issues into that senior government debate. Senior media debate, that political dialogue, and to make sure that firms, whether they're big or small, can see that we're having an impact. So for me, strategy is very much about how do you start to accelerate some of that. but also the economic climate is changing. There is a challenge to deliver growth for many, many big economies around the world, getting us into a debate that is about how you catalyze that growth and how you are the industry that fundamentally that growth is built on. That I think is really important. And the strategy for me is how do we bring all of the different elements of logistics together? How do we understand those themes? And how do we turn them into a debate that makes us really relevant from a big macroeconomic perspective? So how do we lift that stuff up and put it part of decision making and public debate over the next few years? And I've got the benefit of an organization that's been moving very aggressively and successfully in that direction, and I'm trying to speed that up. In terms of things like dual use, national security, and so on, this also comes back to where the political debate is changing, where the policy priorities are changing. And what is absolutely clear to me, and it's clear to government, is we don't know what the next few years are going to look like, but probably going to be more demanding and more challenging than the last few years have been. And I think, as with most major economies now, what we recognize is that, as we saw in COVID, you need the public and the private sector to work very, very closely together. You need to have a mutually clear understanding of each other's capabilities and where the gaps in those capabilities are. And there needs to be a clear and consistent plan as to how you're going to deal with those gaps in capability. Now, I think at the moment, what no one can absolutely predict is where we'll be in the next 2 or 3 years. But that logistics infrastructure, moving things around the country, being responsive, being incredibly resilient. Dynamic is a slightly lazy word, but the ability to respond quickly to things that change. These are all real strengths of the logistics industry. By our very nature, we are problem solvers and we find a solution to issues. What I think will happen over the next couple of years is that if we can be successful in getting government to understand the strength and the complexity of the industry, I suspect we will have a growing voice in some of those issues about national resilience, national capability, and if in the very sad eventuality that we have to move to a more front footing in terms of our international relationships, I think it will be very clear that the logistics industry will be part of that. What we need to do first is to make sure government understand the capabilities and also the challenges. And what we need from government is more of a sense of what they might need over the future. We're not there yet, and I don't think government is yet clear in its own mind either of what it needs. But what I would say is I don't think anybody in this debate on either the private sector or the public sector side of these issues don't realise that there'll be a lot of close working over the next 2 or 3 years, and we'll be at the heart of that.
So if I've got it right, the strategy sort of acceleration, I take out of that, we think we're headed in the right direction. We just want to get there quicker.
I think that's right. I think equally, though, what we need to do, what I think is really important for any trade association is to find a way of having really strong evidence. I have a bit of an approach and a phraseology to this, which is the thing that gets you through the door when you're talking to a senior politician is the data. The thing that gets things done is the anecdote. And I think the anecdote is the thing that comes from really having your finger on the pulse of the membership. The data is the thing I think that we do really, really well. And government has told me, and other political parties and journalists have told me, that we have a real reputation for excellent data. What I think we need to do, and where the strategy is if we can become more visible and more focused on what we would call multimodal, which is the areas where those different elements come together. We have got a bigger story to tell about macroeconomics, and where we can do a bit more of the predictive work about the opportunities that present themselves in the big trade deals that the British government is signing, and where international trade movements go, and where Prime Minister has a focus at the moment on improving the relationship with the EU. The logistics industry is going to be central to all of those. So the data that we need and the analytical work that we need to do, we've got superb teams doing it, but we need to make sure that over the next couple of years, we've got even better data on where the industry comes together, where the real strength of the industry is, because that's the way we're going to project ourselves into that bigger debate. So it is about doing it faster. But I think there's also something there about really understanding what does the aggregate strength of this industry add up to.
And how do you go about balancing the needs of this very broad set of members? You talked before, you've got a lot of SMEs, you've got some big global players, different modes of transport. How do you make sure you're sort of giving the right attention and focus on all those different things?
I said when I was offered the job that the measure of this was going to be shoe leather, and I have been a regular visit to my local heel bar. So, I think there is no substitute for unfortunately, it's not really strategic or incredibly insightful, but I think there is no substitute for hard work. And what you have to do is to get out and really understand those member pressures around the country, but also make sure that your team has got the time and the space to access you. And really the Venn diagram where those two things come together and are incredibly valuable is making sure that the insight that you get from talking to members, traveling the country, understanding the industry in all its forms. And for a relatively small geographic country, the difference in pictures from the southwest and the southeast of England to the north of Scotland are sometimes quite stark. In terms of also making time for your staff, it's also critically about making sure that what you're learning about the industry and what the industry is telling you is being reflected in the services that we offer and the policy work that we're doing.
You've mentioned, sort of technology a number of times. If you don't mind, let me just ask rather pointedly, where's AI showing up in the whole logistics system? Is it it's going to help us make slightly better decisions and sort of optimize a bit, or is it having the revolutionary impact that some people certainly anticipate it's going to have in places like law or medicine?
So I think we're probably, like a lot of people, on a bit of a journey. I think that as this industry has benefited, and we now use the word AI, but digital investment over the last few years has been very visible and tangible. In terms of all of the global indices, UK logistics is incredibly good and has utilized technology to make us very efficient. If you go into industries like pharma or manufacturing, many of them operate incredibly complicated just-in-time delivery slots where a vehicle or a train will turn up the minute that the product is required on the factory floor. And that doesn't happen by accident. And it has required a lot of technological innovation over the last few years. With the fact that Brexit and other things have made border crossings more complicated, with the fact that, as we're currently seeing, maritime freight is often having to take longer times to get around the world because it's taking longer journeys to make sure it's safe. Technology and AI is going to be very, very visible, I think, at making sure that those supply chains operate at that level of efficiency and maybe become even more efficient. And AI, I think, is a great tool that currently, and digital technology is often used by some of the bigger firms and the larger medium-sized firms. I think we'll see that start to have a much bigger impact as you go down the scale of logistics firms, and will become more accessible and more valuable to the smaller firms in that sector. So I think that's a potentially very significant improvement. When you look at things like the warehousing sector, the way in which we store things, the way in which some of these facilities now are increasingly run, some of them in the dark with robots and AI that are moving product around, getting the product in the right place to be picked, the ability for when the product leaves the warehouse to not necessarily in the past have put two different things on the same vehicle that people would have previously considered, but being able to knit those journeys together and make sure that you can get the most efficient use of your logistics capacity. I think AI is going to be really, really powerful there. And I think AI will help support some of the things we talked about in multimodal thinking, because AI be part of the way in which I think we think across road haulage, rail freight, air freight and sea freight, and make that happen really productively and capably. And again, that's been something that the bigger firms have always had at their disposal. And I think it will start to provide opportunities for smaller firms to think across those different modes in a new and innovative way. So I think it will have a big impact. What I would say, which I say as a reassurance, is that we may be moving into an era of driverless cars. I think we're still some way away from driverless lorries and driverless trains and driverless planes and driverless boats. And much as I think AI's got huge potential to help those people manage those incredibly complex machines, I think at the moment there will still be substantial human intervention, very pointedly, because I think that's a reassuring point about where the industry goes. And I think that's a very strong point about the capabilities of the industry as well.
You've just mentioned sort of the continued involvement of human beings in a lot of it. Many of the people I talk to in their industry, in their sector, they're facing sort of two, it feels to me like they're interrelated challenges. And just be interested to see whether they show up in logistics or not. And one is an aging workforce, particularly where there's some sort of craft skill or something you more learn by doing than learn in a classroom, that often the average age of the people who do that's getting fairly high. And then yet on the other hand, there's a younger population that's struggling to find roles, to find jobs and often issues of social mobility. I don't even know, Ben, if I've got a terribly well-formed question for you around that, but just interested in any reflections you've got on sort of the age and skill demographics of the workforce that's in the logistics sector.
Yeah, I think there are some very real challenges that you outline. I think there's also grounds for optimism. It goes back to some respects to your previous question. There is undoubtedly, as they are in many different bits of industry, issues around an aging workforce in logistics. And, many aspects of the logistics industry, you will find that the average workforce is average age is well into its 50s. And people aren't coming in numbers at the start of their careers to bring that average age down. Now, there's a lot to be valued and welcomed in that level of experience. Lots of people find it a great industry to work in. They stay here for their entire working lives, and they have a knowledge and expertise that is second to none. But I think we have to definitely recognize that if the conveyor belt is moving people towards the end of their careers and there aren't enough people coming in through the hopper at the start of the process, we're gonna have a problem. The real strength, I think, is that it's an industry where often much of the technology that we talked about, the AI, the digital capability, has been developed in the industry, and we have class capability that's been developed here in logistics. And I think part of the issue is where our lobbying work is about making sure that government policies move on a little bit from an obsession about every 16-year-old has to stay on at school and go to university and get a degree.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who did that, I'm a great fan of that. It's a great thing, but there are other routes that people can take, and we have to move away from a slightly myopic view that the only way in which people will have a successful career is to stay on at school until 18 and go to university. And from a social mobility perspective, the logistics industry is an industry where we employ people in every single part of the UK. Every constituency in the UK has a logistics capability, and in some constituencies, we are the biggest employer in that part of the country. And what we have to do, I think, is to make that technological investment, that technological innovation relevant to young people. We have to get government policy to change so that making careers exciting in industry is part of the job, but also getting schools to be rewarded for encouraging kids to come into the industry. And if you're a 16-year-old and you're thinking about working with tech and working with digital capabilities and being able to improve that and make it better, there is no better industry to come in and work in a whole multitude of different roles than the logistics industry. And I think these are really exciting careers that are well paid, provide a really strong framework. They'll still be here in 30, 40 years' time. And from a social mobility perspective, you can get a job in this industry, raise a family, buy a house, in a way that lots of other industries are struggling to compete with at the moment. So I think there's something about lobbying and changing the policy, and there's something about what we need to do to make sure that people understand that this is a digital industry with digital at its heart, and making that visible and exciting for young people.
Ben, I can really hear the passion in your voice about that, which is great to see and to hear. If you don't mind, I'm going to just maybe go just slightly off piste, and there's a phrase that's in my mind that I'm increasingly interested in, which is businesses with a public remit. Just interested if you see Logistics UK as a business with a public remit. And I know it's a trade body, and we could spend a lot of time debating whether it's a business or not, but you've got customers and, et cetera, et cetera. And then also, when you think about your members, for the most part, would you say they're also businesses that see a public remit? Or are they kind of stereotypically, it's all just about the profit? Interested in any reflections you've got on any of that?
Yeah, I think both from our perspective as a trade association and the industry that we're very proud to represent, we saw some of this absolutely writ large during the global pandemic. Look, I am a business. I need to bring money in to pay the salaries of the people that work for me. I can absolutely assure you my chief financial officer absolutely wouldn't guard us as a business, as with the board that I have to go and present our financial performance figures to. If we're not a business, we're not here. We're not a charity. We've got to make ends meet. We've got to make a profit. We've got to invest that in helping the industry grow. But I think as a business ourselves, as an organization ourselves, during things like COVID and during the current Gulf crisis, we have a real responsibility to not just for lobbying in a sort of silly sense, but to make sure that everyone understands the importance of that sector being able to deliver, because we can't deliver the pharmaceuticals to the hospitals, people won't have their operations. And I think that is really clear. And I think what logistics businesses did during COVID is an incredibly powerful representation of the recognition that these firms are parts of their communities. It was an industry where people got up and went to work even when everyone else was sitting on the sofa watching Tiger King. And that, I think, is recognition that although it was hard and many of those businesses had to restructure very quickly, we used the logistics industry to enable not just business to carry on, but domestic life to carry on. People see that practical stuff every single day, and it's the thing that gets them out of bed in a lot of cases. And I'm very proud to lead this organization because it's an industry that cares about the public and cares about its wider responsibilities.
Ben, thank you. Wow, that's a really stirring kind of call there. I'm sure many more to follow. Anyway, Ben, thank you so much for joining us and sharing both your own experiences and Logistics UK.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.